I've always believed that some stories should never leave the shadows. They're too complicated, too fragile, too drenched in guilt and desire to ever see the light of day. And yet, here I am, writing mine. Maybe it's because anonymity gives me courage, or maybe it's because keeping this buried is slowly poisoning me. Either way, I'll tell it, not for sympathy, not even for judgment, but simply because it happened. And it changed me in ways I never imagined. The truth is, it all began with something so innocent it almost feels absurd in hindsight, a simple introduction. A daughter's surprise. I met her, let's call her Claire, through her daughter. That's the part that still unsettles me when I think about it too long. Her daughter was my classmate, someone I barely paid attention to beyond polite small talk. We shared a course, exchanged notes, and one afternoon, she casually invited me over to her house for a study session. Nothing extraordinary. I was used to those mundane student rituals. I didn't know then that walking into that house would alter my life forever. When I first stepped into their living room, I expected the usual chaos of a family home, shoes kicked off near the door, books scattered across a table, maybe a faint smell of dinner being prepared in the kitchen. What I didn't expect was Claire. She came down the stairs with a grace that froze me where I stood. Tall, elegant, her hair tied loosely back as if she hadn't planned to meet anyone that day. She wore something casual, jeans and a blouse, but it hugged her in all the right places, revealing just enough to stir something inside me I wasn't prepared to feel. She wasn't trying to impress me, she didn't even know me. And maybe that's what made the moment so dangerous. Her daughter introduced me with the kind of careless ease only the young possess. "Mom, this is," she said, mentioning my name without a second thought. Claire smiled politely, her eyes locking with mine for just a second too long. A second that stretched, deepened, and burned its way into me. I don't know if she felt it too. Maybe I imagined it, but that single glance was the spark. We sat at the dining table with our books and laptops, her daughter talking about notes and assignments, while I kept catching glimpses of Claire moving around the house. She wasn't doing anything remarkable, just tidying up, pouring herself a glass of wine, answering her phone, but every gesture drew my attention. Every tilt of her head, every curve of her smile, every subtle sway of her hips when she walked. By the time the study session ended, I knew I'd remember her face more than anything I had read in those textbooks. When I was about to leave, she came closer to say goodbye. Her daughter was already distracted by her phone upstairs, which left us alone in the hallway. She extended her hand to me, and I don't know if it was the wine in her system or just who she was, but her touch lingered, soft, warm, deliberate. That touch stayed with me long after I stepped outside. I tried to shake it off. She was married, I reminded myself. She had a family, a daughter my age. This was not a road I should even think about exploring. And yet, I found myself replaying the smallest details. The way her eyes had searched mine, the way her voice carried a subtle warmth, the way her presence filled the room without trying. Weeks passed, but fate, or maybe something darker, had other plans. Her daughter kept inviting me back for study sessions. And every time, Claire was there. Sometimes in the background, sometimes passing by, sometimes stopping to offer us snacks or ask how school was going. Always kind, always polite, but beneath those polite exchanges, there was an undercurrent. Something unspoken, growing heavier each time. The moment that sealed it came one late afternoon. Her daughter had stepped out briefly to grab something from a friend's house, leaving me alone at the dining table. Claire walked in, holding a glass of wine again, and for the first time, she sat down across from me. "You're here often," she said with a smile. "My daughter must trust you a lot." I chuckled, suddenly nervous. "Yeah, we just help each other out with schoolwork. Nothing special." She tilted her head, studying me in a way that made my pulse race. "Don't sell yourself short. You seem different from the boys she usually brings around." That sentence, it might as well have been a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed inside me. Our conversation was harmless on the surface, but the way she leaned in, the way her eyes lingered, the softness of her voice, everything about it felt charged. I left that evening with my heart hammering, a storm raging inside me. I knew I should stop coming. I knew I should draw a line. But the truth was, I didn't want to. Something about her pulled me in, and resisting it felt like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. That was how it began. With a daughter's casual invitation, a mother's lingering glance, and a secret that started to take root in the shadows of a home where I never should have been. And as much as I tried to tell myself I could walk away, deep down, I already knew, I wouldn't. Temptation doesn't come all at once. It creeps in slowly, like water seeping through cracks, unnoticed until the foundation is already weakened. By the time I realized how deep I was sinking into Claire's world, it was already too late. I kept telling myself it was harmless, that I was just imagining the looks, the pauses, the quiet invitations buried inside her words. But then came the afternoon that proved otherwise. It was a Friday. Her daughter had insisted we work on a project at their house since her parents were supposed to be out. I remember feeling almost relieved, thinking maybe I'd finally have a break from Claire's presence, from the constant pull I couldn't explain. But when I arrived, the house wasn't empty. Claire was there, alone. She just stepped out to the store, Claire said when she opened the door, her eyes sparkling in a way that immediately unsettled me. She'll be back soon. You can wait inside. Something in her tone felt different that day. Softer. Closer. I walked in, my throat dry, my heartbeat heavy in my chest. She was wearing a fitted dress, nothing extravagant, but it clung to her body in ways I couldn't ignore. I tried not to look, but my eyes betrayed me. She noticed. You're quiet, she said, settling into the chair across from me at the dining table. Usually, I can't get a word in when my daughter's around. You talk more with her than you do with me. I managed a weak laugh. That's because she keeps the conversation going. And I don't, she asked, tilting her head. Her question wasn't innocent, and we both knew it. I cleared my throat, shifting in my seat. You do. It's just different. Different how? She pressed, leaning forward just slightly, her elbows resting on the table, her neckline falling open in a way I couldn't unsee. The room felt too warm. My body screamed at me to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. I looked at her, and she looked back, unflinching, her eyes holding mine like a secret neither of us wanted to break. Finally, she smiled. Relax, I'm just teasing you. But the damage was done. The tension had already shifted into something sharper, something undeniable. I tried to bury myself in my notes, pretending to work while my mind replayed every detail of her presence, her perfume drifting faintly through the air, the way she crossed her legs, the sound of her sipping from her glass. Every second felt like a test I was failing. And then, as if fate enjoyed pushing me further, her daughter texted to say she was delayed. Another 30 minutes. The silence stretched between us. Claire stood up, walked to the kitchen, and returned with another glass of wine. Do you want one? She asked. I hesitated. Accepting felt like crossing a line, but refusing felt like drawing one. I nodded. Sure. She poured, her fingers brushing mine as she handed me the glass. That single touch was electric, dangerous. My hand lingered around the stem of the glass longer than necessary, just to feel the ghost of her skin against mine. We sipped in silence, and then she broke it. You know, she said softly, her voice carrying something heavier now, I sometimes wonder what it would have been like if I'd made different choices when I was younger. If I hadn't gotten married so quickly. If I'd explored more. I froze, unsure how to respond. Her words weren't meant for small talk. They were an opening, a window into something she was daring me to step into. You still can, I said before I could stop myself. The second the words left my mouth, I wanted to swallow them back. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, slowly, knowingly. You think so? She whispered. Her gaze locked with mine, and suddenly, the space between us felt charged, alive. She reached out, her hand brushing across mine, deliberately this time, her fingers lingering. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out every warning my mind was screaming. I should have pulled away. I didn't. Her hand slid higher, resting gently on my wrist, her thumb tracing small circles against my skin. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of everything we weren't supposed to do. Claire, I murmured, my voice breaking under the strain of both desire and guilt. She leaned in, close enough for me to catch the faintest hint of her perfume, close enough that her breath touched my cheek. You don't have to say anything, she whispered. I know. And in that moment, with her eyes searching mine, the world outside that house ceased to exist. The rules, the consequences, the danger, they all blurred into nothing. There was only her, only us, suspended in a moment that was equal parts madness and inevitability. Then the sound of the front door unlocking shattered it. Her daughter's voice carried in from outside, casual, unaware of what she had almost walked in on. Claire pulled her hand back instantly, her face slipping into its calm, composed mask as though nothing had happened. But I knew, we both knew, that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face leaning toward mine, felt her touch against my skin, heard her whisper echoing in my head, I know. We hadn't kissed. We hadn't crossed the final line. But the truth was, we already had. In our minds, in our hearts, in the secret current pulling us together, we had stepped into forbidden territory. And I understood something terrifying: this wasn't going to fade. It was only the beginning. I used to believe self-control was stronger than desire, that if you told yourself, no, often enough, the feeling would eventually die. But with Claire, the opposite happened. The more I tried to resist, the more powerful the pull became. By the time our restraint finally snapped, it didn't feel like a choice anymore. It felt like gravity. It happened on an afternoon that was supposed to be ordinary. Another study session, another visit to their house. I told myself I would keep my head down, focus on work, avoid her as much as possible. But life has a cruel way of testing resolve when it's weakest. Her daughter wasn't home when I arrived. She went to the library, Claire said when she opened the door. She said you'd know where to find her notes. You can wait here. Every instinct told me to leave, to say I'd come back later. But instead, I nodded and stepped inside. She was in the kitchen, moving around with an ease that made me hyper-aware of every motion. She poured herself coffee, asked if I wanted some, and when I said yes, she handed me a mug with that same lingering touch I remembered from before. My hand trembled slightly when our fingers brushed, and she noticed. She always noticed. You're nervous, she said softly, almost like an accusation, almost like an invitation. I'm not, I lied. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that strips you bare. You don't have to pretend. We sat at the dining table, the silence heavier than any words we could have spoken. I tried to distract myself by flipping through the notes I'd brought, but I couldn't focus. Not with her sitting across from me, not with her eyes on me in a way that felt more intimate than any touch. Do you ever wonder, she began, her voice low, why life puts certain people in our path? People we shouldn't want, but do anyway. Her words sank into me like a stone into water. I looked up, and her gaze was steady, unflinching, filled with a heat that stole the air from my lungs. I think about it all the time, I admitted, before I even realized I was speaking. That was it, the confession neither of us could take back. The silence that followed was charged, a living thing pressing us closer, until standing on opposite sides of it felt unbearable. I don't remember who moved first. Maybe it was me, maybe it was her, maybe it was both of us pulled forward by something neither of us controlled. But suddenly, she was closer, her hand grazing mine, her face only inches away. Claire, I whispered, my voice breaking under the weight of everything I was about to do. Don't, she murmured, don't ruin it with words. And then she kissed me. It wasn't tentative, it wasn't hesitant, it was urgent, hungry, years of longing and loneliness spilling out in one reckless act. Her lips were warm, soft, trembling against mine, and the second they touched, every wall I'd built collapsed. I kissed her back, my hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer, needing her like I'd never needed anyone before. The taste of her coffee lingered on my tongue, mixed with the sweetness of her breath, and it was intoxicating. Her body pressed against mine, her hands sliding up my chest, her nails grazing my skin through my shirt. Every nerve lit up, every rational thought burned away, leaving only raw desire. We shouldn't, I tried to say between kisses, but she silenced me with her mouth, her desperation matching mine. I know, she gasped against my lips. But I can't stop. Neither could I. The world outside didn't exist. There was only us, tangled together, consumed by something forbidden yet irresistible. The guilt was there, lurking at the edges, but it wasn't strong enough to stop us. Nothing was. Her dress slipped against my fingers, her skin warm beneath my touch, her breath catching as if she'd been starving for this as much as I had. And in that moment, all I could think was how wrong it was, and how right it felt. Minutes blurred into hours, though in reality it couldn't have been more than a stolen handful of moments. When it finally ended, when we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless, our bodies trembling, our faces flushed with a mixture of desire and terror. She looked at me, her eyes wide, her lips swollen from my kiss. This can't happen again, she whispered, though the way her voice shook betrayed the lie. I nodded, though I didn't believe it either. For a long time, we just sat there in silence, listening to the sound of our breathing, knowing the line we'd crossed could never be erased. We had tasted something we weren't supposed to touch, and it had awakened a hunger that wouldn't disappear. When her daughter finally came home, everything looked normal. She found us at the table, books open, coffee mugs half full, no sign of the storm that had just passed. But inside, everything had changed. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of that kiss, every touch, every whispered breath. Guilt gnawed at me, but beneath it was something stronger, desire, unshakable and wild. We had fallen, and there was no climbing back to the safety of what was before. It wasn't a question of if it would happen again. It was only a matter of when. After that first kiss, there was no going back. We told ourselves it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, but we both knew it wasn't true. The truth was far darker and far more exhilarating. We wanted it to happen again. And it did. The days that followed were a blur of restraint and temptation. Every time I returned to that house for study sessions, I found myself searching for her before I even set my books down. Claire had become the pulse beneath everything, her glance across the room, her subtle smile when her daughter wasn't looking, the brush of her hand as she passed me a drink. Each tiny moment carried the weight of everything we weren't supposed to want. At night, I would lie awake with her kiss still on my lips, her voice in my ears, her perfume clinging to my memory like smoke. I was obsessed, consumed, and I hated myself for it. But the hunger was stronger than the guilt. The next time it happened, it was more deliberate. Her daughter had gone upstairs to shower, leaving us alone in the kitchen. I was helping Claire put away groceries when our hands collided over the same bag of apples. That simple contact was all it took. We froze, staring at each other, breathing the same air, our bodies magnetized. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. I grabbed her, pulling her close, my lips finding hers with the same desperate urgency as before. This time, she didn't resist. She melted into me, her hands clutching the back of my shirt as though she was afraid I'd vanish if she let go. We kissed until footsteps sounded from above, forcing us apart, gasping, pretending to be busy when her daughter entered. The danger only fueled us more. We were living in shadows now, stealing moments whenever we could, hiding our fire beneath the surface of ordinary life. It became a pattern. Every visit carried the possibility of another stolen touch, another kiss hidden between conversations, another brush of lips in hallways no one else saw. It was reckless, terrifying, and yet it filled me with a kind of exhilaration I'd never known. One afternoon, the house was empty except for the two of us. She didn't waste time with excuses. She led me upstairs, into the bedroom she shared with her husband. The irony didn't escape me. The very space where she was supposed to be faithful became the stage for betrayal. The door clicked shut, and in that moment, there was no hesitation. Her lips were on mine, her hands urgent, her body trembling with the same mix of guilt and need that burned through me. Clothes fell away, barriers crumbled, and for the first time, we crossed every line. It was frantic at first, hungry, desperate, like two people starving for something forbidden. But then it slowed, softened, turned into something more than lust. The way she looked at me, the way her hands lingered, the way she whispered my name, it wasn't just physical. It was emotional, raw, a release of years of loneliness she had carried in silence. Afterward, we lay there in the aftermath, the sheets tangled, our breaths uneven. She stared at the ceiling, her expression unreadable, and for a moment, I thought she might regret it. Instead, she whispered, "I feel alive again." Those words cut deeper than any confession. She wasn't just breaking vows, she was rediscovering herself, and I was the catalyst. It terrified me and thrilled me all at once. But with that exhilaration came reality. We had to hide. Her husband couldn't know, her daughter couldn't suspect. Every laugh, every smile, every accidental brush of hands in public had to be contained, disguised. I learned the art of subtlety, how to sit across the table without letting my eyes linger too long, how to pass her a cup without touching her fingers, how to mask the heat between us with casual words. Yet in private, behind closed doors, all restraint vanished. We carved out stolen hours whenever we could, early mornings, afternoons when the house was quiet, even moments in her car parked blocks away from her home. Each encounter was riskier than the last, but neither of us could stop. The thrill of secrecy was its own kind of addiction. Still, guilt gnawed at us. Sometimes, after we'd given in, she would curl against me and whisper, "What are we doing?" Her voice would tremble with fear, with shame, with the knowledge of how fragile the balance was. But every time, I would kiss her hair and say, "We're living." And she would close her eyes, clinging to me like she wanted to believe it. The truth was, we were both trapped between two worlds, the one everyone saw, neat and respectable, and the one we built in shadows, dangerous and intoxicating. I knew it couldn't last forever. Secrets this heavy eventually surface. But at the time, I didn't care. All I cared about was the way she made me feel, the fire in her touch, the softness in her voice, the way she looked at me as if I was the only man who had ever truly seen her. We were playing with fire, and every time we got away with it, the flames only burned hotter. And somewhere deep down, I knew, we weren't just risking discovery. We were risking everything. I never thought I would become the kind of man who lived a double life, carrying another woman's secrets while silently feeding the fire of my own desires. Yet here I was, months after that first night with her, still entangled in a world that belonged only to us. Her name was never to be mentioned out loud. She was simply, her, in my head, and, you, in the whispered words that slipped from my mouth when I was too far gone in her embrace. The daughter, the one who had unknowingly sparked this hidden adventure, remained blissfully unaware. To everyone else, life appeared perfectly normal. But for me, reality had split into two parallel lines, the ordinary and the forbidden. The ordinary was my everyday life, work, small talk, routines, and obligations that made up the fabric of a man who looked stable from the outside. The forbidden was her world, the late-night texts that made my heart pound, the thrill of sneaking into her home when her husband was away, the rush of pulling her into my arms before she even had time to take off her shoes. What kept us going was not just lust, though that was the fuel at first. It was something deeper, a strange bond, woven with the threads of her vulnerability and my reckless hunger. She trusted me with parts of herself she had never revealed to anyone, not even to the man she had been married to for over 2 decades. She told me things in the dark, how she sometimes looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back, how she had given so much of herself to motherhood and being a wife that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply be alive. I listened, not as a savior, but as a man who understood the danger of emptiness. And in return, she gave me something no one else ever had, the raw honesty of a woman who had nothing left to prove, nothing left to pretend. But with every secret meeting, every stolen kiss, every moment I felt her nails dig into my back, the risk grew heavier. I couldn't ignore it. One wrong move, one careless mistake, and the truth would explode in ways that would ruin everything. I remember one night vividly. It was raining hard, the kind of storm that made the streets empty and the air electric. She had texted me only 2 words, "Come now." I didn't hesitate. When I arrived, she was already waiting by the door, her hair damp, her eyes blazing with something between desperation and hunger. She pulled me in before I could even speak, her lips pressing against mine as though the storm outside had leaked into her veins. That night, we didn't talk much. We didn't have to. Our bodies carried a conversation of their own, urgent, reckless, unrelenting. Every touch, every gasp, every whispered plea felt like a rebellion against the lives we were supposed to be living. And when it was over, when we lay tangled in the sheets, she turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "You make me feel like I'm not invisible anymore." It was such a simple confession, but it hit me harder than anything else she had ever said. For years, she had lived in the shadow of being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's provider. But with me, she was simply herself, wanted, desired, alive. And that was when I realized, this was no longer just about an affair. This was about resurrection. But reality is cruel. No matter how intoxicating the nights were, daylight always came with its reminders. She still had a husband. She still had a daughter, the very daughter who had unknowingly placed me in her path. And I still had my own life, my own responsibilities, my own fragile balance that could shatter if the truth came out. The weight of secrecy began to settle in my bones. Sometimes, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, imagining the look on her husband's face if he ever found out. Or worse, the devastation in her daughter's eyes. That thought alone was enough to choke me. Yet, every time I considered walking away, she would draw me back with a single message, a single glance, a single reminder that what we shared was too rare to simply abandon. So, I stayed. I stayed in the shadows, in the stolen hours, in the unspoken promise that our secret would never see the light of day. And here I am now, writing this down, not for her, not for you, but for myself. Because sometimes the weight of silence becomes unbearable. Sometimes, the truth needs to exist somewhere, even if it remains faceless and nameless. She was never caught. Her husband remains in the dark. Her daughter continues to live her life, never realizing how one small surprise changed her mother's world, and mine, forever. And me, I remain anonymous, just a man carrying a story too heavy to keep locked inside. A story of desire, of recklessness, of resurrection. A story that doesn't ask for judgment, only understanding. Because sometimes, the most dangerous adventures are not the ones people see, but the ones that happen in the quiet corners of our lives, where passion collides with secrecy, and love is both a blessing and a curse. This was ours, and it will remain ours, hidden in the shadows. Forever. In this true infidelity story, a mother's life takes an unexpected turn when her daughter unknowingly introduces someone who awakens a side of her she thought was long gone. Told from the perspective of an anonymous male narrator, this 5-chapter series explores secrecy, temptation, and the hidden passion that reshaped her identity. It's not about being caught, it's about living two lives in silence, where one surprise led to an affair that could never be spoken out loud. Mature, raw, and emotionally intense, this story captures the delicate balance between desire and danger. Thank you for staying with me through this deeply emotional and untold story. Every hidden truth, every secret shared here, is a reminder that life often holds more beneath the surface than anyone dares to admit. Your time, attention, and curiosity mean the world. It keeps this channel alive and growing. If you found yourself drawn into this story, touched by its honesty, or simply intrigued by the layers of love, betrayal, and hidden desires, then I invite you to become part of this journey with us. Your support is the reason we can continue bringing you these raw and unforgettable narratives. Don't just watch, subscribe now to never miss the next secret revealed. Hit the notification bell so you're always the first to know when a new story drops. If this story struck you, like and share it. It helps us reach more people who crave real, unfiltered confessions. Leave a comment below. Your thoughts matter, and your voice is part of this community. Remember, every subscription fuels the courage to bring more true infidelity stories your way.